to Common Ground, conversations exploring the stories and perspectives of people building the UK India corridor. My name is Lakshmi Kaul, and I'm bringing you this UK India series for Global Order. Over the last 2 decades, India's relationship with the world has changed dramatically. We've moved from outsourcing and migration conversations to discussions around innovation, research, clean energy, AI, and global talent leadership. And education sits right at the center of that story. My guest today is someone who's worked across diplomacy, trade, higher education, helping build bridges between India and some of the most influential institutions from around the world. He's the managing director for South Asia at University of New South Wales, Sydney, and formerly has been the regional director for University of Birmingham in India. I'd like to welcome Dipankar Chakraborty to Common Ground. Hi Dipankar, welcome.
Hi Lakshmi, firstly very good to see you and thank you for having me and for the opportunity.
It's great to have you here. So you began your career in trade and diplomacy before actually moving into higher education leadership. I want to know what drew you towards education as a long-term mission.
See, education scales impact. One partnership can change lives and society for the better. And I've seen that happen. So while trade moves goods, education moves societies. So I think the biggest impact being, you seeing single-handedly and feeling that your work creating impact, empowering the next generation, I think gives you a wonderful feeling. So that has drawn me into education. But when I changed jobs, I changed industries. Now I have completed all my education in India. And what I felt is I've seen how the right institution and the ecosystem can really expand someone's trajectory. And education is, I would consider, actually often the first real multiplier in one's life. But for me, it was not just about acquiring knowledge. It was about accessing different ways of thinking, different networks, ecosystems, and different possibilities. So for me, good education doesn't just move you across borders, it moves you across possibilities. So that's how I view education as.
And I suppose in a way, a university is like a melting pot of all sorts of sectors, opportunities,
Absolutely.
geographies even. Through your career, has there been any moment when you felt that India now was entering a different phase globally for education? You've spent a fair bit of time in education sector now as well.
So look, I think firstly, I would say that, industry-wide, the perception about India changed when India shifted from being a cost advantage to a capability advantage, which is in talent, tech, and innovation. For education, I would say the real shift happened. There were universities or international universities who were operating and present in India, but they were there only for students. And this I'm talking about, let's say, 2 to 3 decades back. That has seen a clear shift in which I think the world universities are not just viewing India as just a student pipeline, but as ways by which you can build capability, at home and at scale as well. So I think the new government policies, which allowed, liberalized the education sector, I would say, opened up opportunities for international universities to do a lot more in India. Not just opening campuses is probably one pillar of it, and that I would say is the highest form of collaboration. But now there is a structured way in which the government is actually promoting internationalization, because it feels that students will, internationalization does have a huge positive impact in the outlook of a student. That doesn't mean you have to go abroad and study for the entire duration, but various platforms and facets of it can be used to essentially deliver value. And that is what I'm seeing. Probably I would say that, for me, I think the defining moment for India was when the government in 2014, the change came in and there was a change in the political leadership. What predominantly changed is how India is perceived in the global stage and how you need to consider India, not just consider that as a market, but as a partner. Right? I think that predominantly shift was led by the change in the political leadership in 2004.
Interesting. And so, do you think now education is becoming that strategic bridge between, say, India and the UK, but also equally the world around?
Absolutely. So I'll give you two things. So one is, education was always there, but more as a supporting pillar in the partnership. But now I think it sits right at the center of it. If you look at any international trade agreements that that the government is negotiating with other international partners and countries, education and movement of people does come from core features. One of them being mutual recognition of qualifications. That was never, earlier India used to have standalone negotiations with different governments, but now it's combined and it is like, in the form of a deal. Now, like I was saying, education sits at the center of kids' innovation. And I think our Prime Minister coined the term between India and UK as the human bridge, which basically drives the relationship. Education is a trust building channel for that. You have students, researchers, create relationship that outlasts any cycle of politics. But I think education is not just the human bridge anymore. I think it is becoming the foundation on which the bridge stands on. So absolutely very, very center at the focus of it. And India is doing the right things by including education when it is negotiating, deals with other parties.
And of course, the extension of the post-study work visas in the UK has also helped this human living bridge kind of do better, and there are more students. I want to know that, of course, children, from all over the country in India, go all over the world to study. They are, I think, studying in various universities. Is that relationship, in your view, still too transactional, or is it it's slowly becoming more strategic?
I wouldn't describe it as transaction, and not least, at least not in the way it is often framed. There is a visible layer around admissions, fees, but I think underneath that, the relationship is more structural and more long term. So you have now Indian students, when they go, they stay back, they become top researchers, they become academics, they go on to be deans and even lead global institutions. That is within the academic ecosystem altogether. You step out, they form part of industry, they're leading industry, become founders, and they become global connectors. So they're shaping the direction often in which, these institutions are now taking. So what we really see is that, a relationship that probably starts with mobility is evolving into a partnership. And it may begin as a transaction, but it moves into what you would call an ecosystem. So I don't think this is transaction at play. And I would also say from the institution's perspective, they are also not trying to view this as a single, transaction. I know there is a huge emphasis placed in my current university, UNSW, which is about student success. How are you supporting students so that they are successful and they achieve their objectives? And that may not be just getting an immediate job, giving them those experiences that actually add more value into the persons they become, into the kind of thinkings they shape. So it's a both way part, and I would not call it a transaction relationship, because then it would just limit itself to a small numbers and it would not progress.
And I suppose success has, direct relationship between the actual ambition of the one who's approaching the institution for their education. What is it that the Western institutions still do not understand about Indian students and their ambition, especially now, as ambition is also very dynamic?
Agreed. So I think, many things, but and I haven't said many things, but plenty of things. But there is an overall myth which drives decisions that India is a price sensitive market and Indian students are price sensitive. So if it's at this price, then it will not attract Indian students, right? Or then India is not the right segment or the kind of audience that we're looking at. We feel that that's a myth, because Indian students are value driven and outcome driven. Yes, they're value conscious, they look at price, but ultimately what drives them is what is the value they are deriving, not the price that they are paying for. I think also there is another myth that Indians choose international education for immigration purposes only. Now, yes, Indians want a global career, but I think times have now changed when Indian students would just view international education as a mean to go and then settle abroad. There is a growing segment of Indian students who are thinking about a global experience, having an international experience, having startups, cross-border careers, but then coming back and building back in India. That is a shift which I think not all Western institutions understand very well. I think there's also what is often underestimated is how much confidence has grown in the Indian student, himself, or the mindset in the Indian students. Earlier, getting into a global university was itself a very big achievement. But now that's like the starting point. Students are asking, what can I do with this? How much control do I have in this trajectory? So the Indian students are evolving, and that's where I think probably somewhere the Western institutions fail to understand the pulse.
Also, I think it's not just for a qualification that they're, training anymore. They're constantly evolving their understanding and that's the shift that's happened. Also, one of the dilemmas I've always had, when I was in the UK, and whenever we had those conversations about, the post-study work visa, for instance, I would argue that, why would you invest in a student's education and then quickly drive them away when they are willing to stay back and contribute to your the society, the fabric of that particular country's fabric, rather than just sending them away quickly and not doing something with the education, the knowledge that they have gained, and then build a better partnership between their home country and the country that they've studied in. Do you think that is a place that we could potentially see ourselves in now, or having those conversations between institutions and countries?
Absolutely. Look, like I mentioned, Indian students are value conscious. And one of the primary drivers for their choosing to do international education is to seek a global and a cross-border career. So you need to provide that opportunity to students to have that experience and to build that global skills, and also to contribute to the economy, because not just the fees, but even the knowledge sharing that is happening. And then, students are able to give back to the society as well, both in not just in terms of, let's say, science, but even in terms of, in other fields as well. So I think it is absolutely wrong and short term to view students in the lens of immigrants. They're not net, immigrants, but see that, give them that time by which they are able to implement some of the learnings that they have acquired, form the networks, form the partnerships, and then see how they take their career off at a global scale.
Absolutely. One of the important ecosystems of a student is their family. I've heard conversations where families are not confident that Indian kids, especially, those who are a bit more spoiled in terms of having help around the house, how are they adjusting to a foreign, land, and how are they adapting to the lifestyle, which is a bit more demanding, by when you're living on your own, you need to wash your dishes, you need to learn to cook, or manage somehow the everyday chores. Do you see that there are challenges like that come to you, and are family expectations, pressures coming in the way of them choosing to study abroad?
I would really say that these are challenges, but these are some of the concerns that parents would have, that how would my ward adjust, whether he will like or she will like doing this, or whether this will impact their psychosocial behavior, have a stress on them. I think parents are right in having that concern, because they have helped you grow up and are used to giving you a certain kind of lifestyle with an expectation that you are used to that kind of a setting. But I think given the global exposure and now the amount of people, the network that people have in terms of both either your friends or families or relatives staying overseas, you pretty much have an idea as to what the student life is going to be about. I would also say that many universities who do these sessions, before, you would call them a briefing session, they give you a pretty real life picture as to what is expected, what is your life going to be like. Now look, it is a big change, there is no doubt about it, and these are young kids, right? Maybe just 17, 18, some of them even less than 18, and then the PG segment. So that, I think, level of anxiety, and any change brings an anxiety, so there are expectations. Our role of universities, it's our role and duty to manage the expectations and tell them what they want to expect and face, and give them tips as to how they can encounter what they should do during their O week. What are the clubs and societies they should look at. They should not just restrict in studies and books, focus on networking and extracurricular. So that level of information, which is before the student arrives, is presented to the student and their families. But I think any good international university will have a very strong network of support that they would provide to the students once they land. And I can tell you that both in Birmingham and in UNSW, I have seen those extensive student support being provided, whether in terms of stress, anxiety, any healthcare problems. So these institutions actually have structured mechanisms to support post-arrival and even during it. So I think, yes, parents are concerned, rightly so. Students are excited, some bit of anxiety, but I think there is sufficient level of support and structured support available to help them prepare about this and navigate the challenges that they might face once they're there.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the anxieties more on the front of families wondering how is my child going to adjust in a foreign land. Sometimes children come from very remote locations as well, and they've done so well, and they want to expand their horizons and the families are not that confident from their own inhibition. So it's great to know
Absolutely.
that that support system already exists to give them that encouraging platform to grow, build their understanding of the world cultures.
Absolutely, yes.
Do you think, therefore, then the Indian students still are seeking a Western validation, or do you see that they are becoming more self assured globally?
So I don't think they're seeking validation in a Western thing. I think the level of confidence is now far, far more there in the mind of Indian students. And I think what matters today more than validation is global relevance. So what are the skills? What is the knowledge? What is the mobility? What are the networks? And what's the purpose? That's more important than seeking validation from a Western university. I think Indian students are also wanting an education that will allow them to be globally mobile but locally relevant. So, understand what are the latest technologies impacting that will bring in the next round of disruption, both in the world, but even in their. So I don't think they're seeking international education for validation, but it's more about the relevance that they will have.
There was a time when India had a big debate about brain drain. I mean, I remember in school we had debate competitions and discussions pretty extensively about whether India should have international education and now be moving towards a brain drain. I noticed that we might actually now be at a time where we are entering brain circulation. The narrative is slowly changing. Tell me something about that and your own experiences and insights.
So absolutely, completely agree. It's not about brain drain anymore. I think mobility is now a two-way and a multi-stop. And I think I also believe that the best talent doesn't leave. It connects. And I'll give you an example by which, I'm saying about how the circulation in this thing is happening. So when UNSW decided to establish a campus in Bengaluru, the biggest, obviously, it is offering the same world-class education, the same standards, but there were questions about who will teach the programs. So will you be, hiring, will you be bringing academics from Sydney, parachuting them over here who will deliver the programs, fly in and fly out, or what's going to be the model line? And then we were very clear in saying that, look, we are not seeing this as a study center or as a short-term thing. If this is a campus, then we need to it will have its own faculty. So this faculty will be hired with exactly the same standards and same rigorous process that we do hire academics in our Sydney. The same level of people will be involved. And what we found is that we received applications across the world. Majority of the applications were from Indians living abroad who wanted an opportunity to come and work for a world top 20 university, because this then allows them, let's say a top Indian researcher in the US or in Europe, not very pleased with the way geopolitical things are happening and looking for an opportunity to come back. This was an excellent opportunity for them because it gave them a world top 20 ecosystem to be a part of. And that's how we saw huge amount of applications from the faculty. So this is a live example of how these policies have actually helped do a brain circulation.
And you don't need to travel miles to now, get that world class education. It's all here.
Absolutely. That's always there. But this is something that I have seen, how policy by the government, which will help Indian students access quality education, having other effects of attracting top quality Indian scholars. And I would not just restrict it to Indian scholars. I would say global scholars. There are many other nationalities who are looking at India, who wants to come and experience India. And this gives them, and I would say not only UNSW, but let's say the whole host of other reputed universities that are coming in, we are seeing talent reflow coming back. And
naturally it will, because now the world can open a university or a campus. And educationally, I think it's a very exciting phase where universities from abroad are not just recruiting from India. So definitely not brain drain any longer. They're actually building inside India and they're becoming a part very much of the nation building within India.
Absolutely.
And in that relationship, I wonder, what is India's expectation from these global partnerships? How's that shaping the next decade of India?
So I think, look, I must compliment the Indian government and the UGC for the way they have designed the policy and they have implemented it. Earlier governments, again, there was a big gap between policy intent, policy action, and policy execution. But I think the experience have been fantastic. There is support available, from the regulators at every step to assist you. The process is rigorous, rightly so, but there is support and guidance available to let you you know that, this is what we're expecting and this is what is expected from you to deliver. So in terms of, the question on what gap these international universities can help. So one, clearly, if you look at India's demographics, India is the world's most youngest population. You have a huge number of people under the age of 18. If India needs to transform into a superpower, which it will, you can't ignore education. So you need to educate Indians to achieve your full economic potential. The amount of domestic quality institutions that you have to the requirement that you need is a gap. I think there was a statistic which is circulated in the Australian diplomatic network, which they say that India needs 14 universities every week to match up to the demand that it has. And now, is it easy to build institutions from ground scratch at scale? No, it's not. There are processes, systems which have been built, and I think it's a fantastic opportunities for these universities to come and offer the world-class opportunity to students who may wish to remain closer at home, who may not want to go abroad for a variety of reasons, but give them an opportunity to access this world-class education at much more affordable price and empower them as the next generation of change makers. So the expectation from UGC is we will not compromise on quality. Your teaching standards have to be exactly at the same level of what you are doing. Secondly, there's a big focus around, again, who are going to teach your program. So who is responsible for the academic delivery? It has to be the university themselves, and UGC is very, very thorough and rigorous about it. Your admission standards, your academic hiring standards, your student welfare policies, it has to replicate what you follow in your home market. And I think what the UGC has also done is it has kind of also controlled on the quality, because it has restricted that only top 500 world-class institutions will be allowed to apply. So I think it is doing a fantastic job. Let's see what the outcome is. But I think the plan and the intent, and there is commitment from the senior leadership of all these universities. These are decisions which are taken at the council or at the Senate level. These are not decisions below that, which means that the university top leadership is absolutely committed to it. The most significant risk that these universities carry is goodwill and brand, right? It's not financial. Because yes, you may have a bad intake or a couple of bad intakes, but your legacy, your brand name, if that's at stake, it's a far greater thing that you need to be careful about. So I think with the right policy environment, with the right support, with the right execution framework, and given that there is a commitment from right at the senior leadership level of the university, this should poise to be a success, and this will help Indian students. This will help Indian parents. This will help Indian economy to attract leading scholars across the world. It will help India to position as the next big, education hub. Now, Lakshmi, an example, we have seen the Middle East becoming an education hub. There is some extent to what the Southeast Asia has become. But you will not be able to give me one example of a country which has attracted more than 20 universities to set up campuses in 2 years' time. And when we talk about 20 universities, these range from the world top 20 to Russell Group, the world top 100 and world top 200. So we're talking about quality institutions, their senior leadership committing to this strategy. So I'm hopeful that this will work out, and it will mean a fantastic option for Indian students.
And there is a lot of work to be done in India. I mean, India's India's dealing with the productivity challenge, dealing with fixing the value chain, the supply. Yeah. There's so much that needs to be done to help strengthen manufacturing itself beyond the, higher end sort of courses. There's also a big need for vocational trainings and courses, and adding that finesse to those trainings, which is available in India, but not at the scale that it should be, because there aren't enough institutions offering that change. So with all of this backdrop in mind, what is it that an international university coming to India must avoid?
Okay, so but before I do that, I'll probably just bring in and share about it. I spoke about how senior leadership is committed to this decision, and I'll tell you a reason why UNSW interested in this, and then why we have made a decision on it. So this is essentially driven by our 10-year strategy, a 10-year global strategy, which is Progress for All. And the essence of this Progress for All strategy is to looking for opportunities to work with local experts and contribute UNSW expertise to jointly achieve positive change. Now, to give you an example of this, And an example of how we are working this, making this into practice. We are world leaders in in solar technologies and environment. There's a technology that was invented at UNSW by Professor Sir Martin Green, in which that technology is used in 95% of the solar cells in the world. Now, India wants to become solar driven power. India is leading the International Solar Alliance. But if you look at the current manufacturing of the solar PV, India is a net importer. So in UNSW, we have a center called the Solar Photovoltaic Research Excellence. We have helped China become the global leaders in this. Most of the Chinese engineers and founders are actually UNSW graduates. So we are working, I can't disclose the name, but we are working with a major state government in India in establishing a center of excellence in solar PV manufacturing. And one of the components there is that, look, India has engineers, but India doesn't have PV engineers or solar PV engineers. So what short vocational programs could be delivered to help India become at the frontier of next gen solar PV manufacturing country? So that was just, a broader context to let you know how and why and we are seeing this, and again to touch on the vocational side of things and not just the education. I think coming back to your question now about what should major international universities avoid, I think two main misconceptions. One is avoid treating India as a single market. There are many Indias and sub Indias within it, and after every 200 or 100 kilometers, you'll have a different language, taste, preference, food, culture, completely different. So don't treat India as one market. And second is, I think, which is most important, is you may have a fantastic legacy brand, but your credibility in market will come from student experience, student outcomes, and local impact. So if you feel that you are a world top 5 university and that itself will help you to be successful in India, it is not. You will need to be nuanced, and your strategy should look at what is the experience students or researchers are going to have. Are students going to achieve the outcomes that they have desired? And more importantly, what are through the partnerships, what is the local impact you create? That I think will determine success.
And very, very good example there of, how the educational partnership with that thought through strategy of improving a certain sector or, sectoral strength is going to yield better results in terms of longer term partnerships. And then you can expand further. That's very sound advice.
Yeah.
One of the areas where your work therefore becomes very interesting is the intersection of, say, you talked about sustainability, innovation, and education. Why are universities becoming central in solving that climate and industrial challenge today?
Because I think universities are the hotbeds of where your research and development can take place. Industry cannot undertake in blue sky or open research, which is fundamental in coming up with new innovations and problems. So you will have technologies and solutions being invented in university labs that being taken up by or adopted by industry either at scale or even maybe, let's say, a spin out coming out from the university, which will take it out to the market, validate it, and then either scale it up or probably get acquired by one of the leading players in it. But universities will become the center of it. I mean, two things. One is because of the innovation, the R&D ecosystem that it has, and the ability to come up to generate solutions to these problems. And I think secondly, also as the universities becoming influencing policy and working with policymakers as to what are the policy changes that could be required in order to navigate the issues and the challenges. So I think university will continue to play this very, very important role at this intersection.
So one of the things I'm thinking is that because the university is now present in the home country and say India, does that also mean that towards the time when there is a need for work experience exchanges and things like that, because India gives you that platform where you can get scale, you can get that experience so quickly and that exposure so quickly that any other country will probably take many years to offer. Do you think that setting up campuses in different countries like that will actually also open up horizons for the students in all of those countries to see if there can be exchanges, work experience exchanges primarily, and help then therefore circulate that workforce between at least those countries.
Yes, absolutely. I think all the international universities that are establishing campuses in India are thinking about that global education experience. So there are some form of mobility that is embedded in the program, which will offer students that opportunity to either go to the home campus or take advantage of the various partnerships that the university has and access one of the partner institution campuses as an experience. In terms of work experience, I think that is slightly complex and a little bit more complicated because of visa rules coming in and also because of the expectation from industry that, look, when we were discussing with the university about, let's say, internships, and when we asked internship, what organizations that, what is the preferred duration? Industry came back and said that, look, we would like them for 6 months to a year. Now, figuring that time out in an academic calendar, it becomes very tricky. But that can probably be the next phase. And I think it also requires a little bit of government support because it may not be completely possible within the realms of the university to implement it. University will give them an exposure to different cultures, global experience of both academic conduct and maybe even a very short week of how industry, an industry immersion, a week to, let's say, in the TCS office in Sydney, how it happens. But that's not work experience. That's exposure. For work experience, it has to be at the next level. But for universities, definitely, and this is currently in design and being implemented, I think definitely by UNSW, but I'm sure by other universities who are setting up campuses.
Interesting. And related to that is another question where I was at a couple of schools recently in India, and the credentials of the kids were not just of class monitor or school head girl or head boy. They were described as innovators with patents that they filed already, and these are kids in class 9, class 10. These are little kids, and they were also kids who had already secured an investment of second round investment and things like that. Accomplished writers, people who've published something, kids who've done all of this. So I wondered, this is the workforce for future. These are the entrepreneurial and innovator minds of tomorrow that will access opportunities of furthering their education. So educational institutions have to therefore adapt to these kids, because very soon it's going to be a very limited offering that institutions, especially at the schooling level and beyond, what they can do for these kids with AI and opportunity to learn. The horizons are, much, much wider now. Knowledge is everywhere. So how does higher education deal with these sort of kids that come in? And I mean, I'm familiar with incubators and things like that, but is there currently, are you looking at that as a problem statement where the young, people who are coming in have a very different mind and expectation?
Absolutely. And if you have been, looking at it, let's say 10 years ago or 20 years ago, the mindsets have been changing. And with the advent of technology, or let's say in an AI-enabled world, the technical skills will change very, very quickly. What was required or what was a key piece of technology 5 years ago will no longer be in the domain 2 years after now. So what is the differentiator and how do universities make a difference? So I think the key is the differentiator is going to be how graduates learn, adapt, and apply judgment. That's going to remain fundamental, right? Your technologies will come and go. Yes, you will have incubation, you will have this innovation mindset. So yes, a big shift from our generation is, for us, we had to get a job. For us, the status quo was getting into an IIT or an IIM or being in medicine and getting a good job. That is changing. Now, both parents and families want students to be innovators, to be entrepreneurs. But while these other things will change, technology will have a rapid shift. What universities will need to ensure is to see how graduates are learning, adapting, and applying judgment. Because the technical skills have shorter shelf shelf lives, while human capabilities will matter more than ever. So I think the universities should focus on capabilities that endure, and they are adaptability, collaboration, ethical judgment, systems thinking, creativity, resilience. These are some of the things that you will need to ensure that your students are developing these skills so that they can be successful, for a long, long time.
I think that's a good point to do a little rapid fire round, if you're ready.
Yes.
So, one Indian institution the world underestimates.
Okay, I'll give a different answer to this. I would say the India's digital public infrastructure institutions. So, for example, the team behind UPI, because India is now exporting that architecture, shaping how other countries think about inclusion and financial systems. So, it's a great example, I think.
Very good example. One thing the UK education system gets right.
I think the depth of academic inquiry. They still value thinking over speed, progress over perfection. So, yeah.
Let's ask you about Australia as well. One thing the Australian education system gets right.
Focusing on excellence and innovation. So, excellence, but not elitist.
One thing that India gets right that global institutions often miss.
I think solving problems with scale.
AI, is it an opportunity or disruption?
I would like to think of it as an opportunity.
Well, disruption isn't bad.
It is disruptive for sure, but there is a huge amount of opportunity there. So you have to take the optimism out of it. So opportunity for me.
One skill every student must develop.
Agility, because the half-life of skills is shrinking.
A book that influenced your worldview.
Difficult to say one book, but I think I remember Factfulness by Hans Rosling, because it signals rationality, optimism, and evidence-based thinking in one book.
Bangalore or London?
I would say Sydney.
Good. I knew that was coming. One word to describe the future of India.
Unstoppable.
Brilliant. Brilliant answers. Finally, I want to ask you, when people look back, say 2 decades from now, what role do you hope that educational partnership between India and the world, what role would you think would it have played in shaping the future?
I would say contributing to humanity, contributing to economic and social progress, and creating impact and transforming societies.
Very, very profound to know. End the conversation in, and a lot of food for thought there. Great answers there, Dipankar. Lovely talking.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Thank you. It was
Time's
beautiful
just
time.
flown.
Yeah, exactly. Time has just flown. But thank you for the opportunity, and it was really wonderful to interact with you. And again, revisit a bit of my UK days as well. So feeling nostalgic, but thank you once again.
Thank you so much. But on that note, thank you so much, Dipankar, for your time and insights today with us. For our audience, you've been listening to Common Ground for Global Order. If you've enjoyed this conversation, do subscribe, share, and join us as we continue exploring people and ideas shaping the future of our interconnected world. Next week, we'll be speaking to another interesting guest, a prominent voice from the UK-India corridor at Common Ground, presented to you by me, Lakshmi Kaul, for Global Order. Stay tuned.